probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. This topic yields some of the most asked questions we get here at Sunflower Shop. So today, I've invited an old friend and someone who I'm considered to be an expert on this very subject. Bruce Topping has been involved in the alternative medical community his entire life. He speaks all over the country about nutrition, bringing his wealth of knowledge and his easy-to-understand approach when it comes to unpacking controversies over diet and nutritional science. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thanks for having me, man. This is great to be back. It's been a long time, Bryan.
It has been a long time. I don't know how many years we've known each other. Probably 20 years probably now, I think. It's
coming up
been
to
a
that,
while.
yeah.
It is.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking the other day, if I was to go back into history and really think about where did I first hear the word microbiome? I know it was in your training conferences that, when I first heard that term. So I know you sort of brought that term to light, even though I know you didn't invent the term. It definitely, you were saying it way before it was cool. So, I've always admired you for all your research on the microbiome and everything you put out over the years.
Well, thanks, Bryan. That's an honor to hear you say that. I wore that term out for a few years there, I think. I was talking about it. I was like sleeping the microbiome, eating, breathing the microbiome. I was pretty knee deep in that research community for a while, and still,
you sure were.
Still working.
You still are, exactly, Bruce. Well, that's what I wanted to bring you on the show and talk about. I know in the last 20 years, we've always had probiotics, but I definitely think the research has changed. So, what would you say is some of the biggest things you've seen changes in the probiotics world when it comes to research?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everything's gotten more complex. We used to have a lot of simple ideas. I think it used to be kind of a gas tank analogy, right? It was like, well, when we're low on the good guys, the good critters living in our gut, maybe because of chlorinated water or high sugar diets or whatever, everybody knows there's a lot of bad things we're doing to our gut. And there used to be this thinking that it was like, well, let's just shoot for the moon and get huge amounts of cells, trillions of cells. Let's just flood your lumen of your gut. And I think that has collapsed, right? We really learned that, the trillions of cells, there may be a time and place for that. I'm not going to say that's worthless or anything, but I'll say that the research has matured and we've learned a lot more about what the limitations are. We've learned a lot more about what types of problems can exist and what types of problems can be ameliorated with probiotics. We've learned that there's a lot of nuance and person-to-person variability when it comes to how permissive their gut is. I mean, it turns out our biomes truly are unique, and I think it's just basically gotten more sophisticated. That's the big change. We know a lot more than we used to.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, back then, like you said, it was all about potency and trying to cram down as many, CFUs as you could. And now we're learning that diversity really is a big deal these days, isn't it?
Yeah, the diversity is a big element. I think it's also about how the strains are put together. And it matters how you take them. I think in terms of what types of fibers are provided in your daily diet will impact the outcomes. Certainly, I think a lot of people have opportunists of various types. And when I say that, I'm talking about sort of bad guys, or maybe not all bad guys, but opportunists, critters that are growing in places they shouldn't grow. And this causes a lot of symptoms for people. And we've learned a lot about how variable that truly is. It's not just, I think back when I was a kid in the health food industry, it was like Candida. Everything was Candida.
Everything was Candida.
If they had toenail fungus, anything, it would be like, well, if you have blood sugar problems, it's the fungus. If you got dandruff, it's anything between your head to your toes. It was fungal. And I think we've gotten just way more sophisticated. Right now, we understand there's different types of organisms that can grow, and we're even looking at different patterns from the testing, whether it's breath testing or stool analysis. It's just there's been a lot more science, and I think that's the biggest change. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we've had to go back and walk back some of the marketing that this industry has had. I remember it used to be like overhyping the microbiome. It was like, this was going to be the end of antibiotics in therapy. This would be the end of aging. We would solve cancer. And I think it hasn't been that, right? I think we need to come back to earth and understand that while this is a big tool and it pulls on a lot of big levers in the body, right? I mean, the microbiome, your gut is really connected to your brain and your immune system and all these other feedback loops in our body. So it definitely pulls on some big levers when you start shifting the ecology and improving your gut. But it's not necessarily going to like end cancer in our species or be the end of all need for antimicrobial agents like antibiotics or something. I think there was a lot of overhype
Yeah, there definitely was, Bruce.
in those early years and a lot of oversimplification.
Yeah, there sure was. You know, we were doing it for every disease out there, and now we're understanding even the individual strains and what they do and how they work. And so you're right, the science is really grown, and that's what we're all about, is the science. And in fact, I know you work for a company who, you know, is very innovative in the science field of Probulent. So that's why I wanted to bring you on today and explain y'all's technology of what are you doing to make the probiotics, you know, exacerbate in our gut and work even better. So let's start there. Tell us about the Probulent and what they're all about.
Yeah, so it was about 2 years ago, I really started talking with the founder of Probulent, Dr. Jason Mitchell. And, at first I came at him as a competitor. He had a very different view and strategy about how his probiotics were formulated than what I was doing at the time. And we met, and I'll say we had a meeting of the minds after we locked horns for a while. And I've really become super impressed with Jason Mitchell. I mean, this guy is a genius, frankly. And I fell in love with the Probulin story, and that's really why I work here. Probulin, first off, the name. Probulin stands for probiotics and inulin, right? It's probiotic inulin mashed together in one word. Inulin, for those that don't know, is one of the best studied prebiotic fibers. And these are special fibers that feed the probiotics. There's a lot of research on fiber. Most Americans and Westerners in general are not getting enough fiber. I always say if only cheese and bread were full of prebiotics, we would be better off.
We wouldn't have a problem, that's for sure.
Be a lot less bowel problems if, McDonald's and all the fast food joints had lots of prebiotics. But unfortunately, those come from beans and nuts and seeds and vegetables and fruits. Tends to be, the same old stuff we all know we're not eating enough. And so I fell in love with Probulin because it's all about innovation. And specifically, I got really into this idea about delivery systems and what we're seeing in the research about probiotics and how they're delivered. And I think what we'll get into later, but what I really became fascinated with, and one of the key parts I think of Probulin, is that we're focused on reanimation, not just surviving through the stomach, not just surviving through the bile, and not just getting to the colon. That's the big show for a lot of companies, and that's a worthwhile endeavor too. But we go further at Probulin. We really actually look at things like tonicity, which we'll get into. It's a fancy word for how much salt is in a cell versus out of a cell. Controlling that salt gradient is important. Having the fiber, like inulin in the capsule, is a big part of our brand narrative. We really believe that having a whole delivery system that's more than just acid protection is really a big key to the brand. And also, I became amazed anecdotally early on. I mean, I'd seen Probulin products really excel. I've been selling and taking probiotics from many brands. I mean, I grew up in the health food stores. My parents run a chain of those. And I always say I grew up eating the untradeable lunch back when carob pods and tofu were not cool. And it was a whole different environment back then with probiotics. And I've tried many, many different strains, many different brands. And I have to say that the anecdotal responses I was getting from Probulin were incredible. I mean, it was frankly, sorry, I'm getting like every reminder. That's the end of them. But the idea here is that there's just so many anecdotal responses. People were taking Probulin products, and I was consistently hearing like, this product really changed my bowels. All of a sudden, I had way less cramping or bloating, or my regularity went, right to where I wanted. I just consistently heard so much feedback, and it started making me take a harder look at what Jason was doing over here at Probulin. And I became fascinated. And the more I learned, the more I fell in love with this technology. I think that we really have something unique here in terms of how we deliver the probiotics and in terms of what other co-ingredients. I know we're going to talk about elderberry and eldermine. I'm a kid in a candy store that I get to look around and study all the raw materials, sit through the science presentations, pour through the charts and the graphs, and then get to select the formulation, the amounts. It's really a dream come true for me. And being able to do it here at Probulin, where I think we're on the cusp of something big. I think people are learning more and more about probiotics. And I think that the science continues to refine and demonstrate the utility and the need, right? I think most people out there, frankly, are not eating fermented foods. Frankly, most people don't get enough fiber. And a lot of people, when you look at their bowel health, there's a lot of pretty big issues that we already know. We don't need to do a bunch of science analysis and look at all the specific markers of their immune system. We can really just look at their function. You know, a lot of people are reading War and Peace on the Throne. It's like taking a long time to move their bowels, or they know where every bathroom is on the way home from work because they have, urgent scenarios happening regularly for them. Or, I mean, you get on these forums or you talk to people in this community and it can take over their life. And frankly, I love that Probiotics is making tools that can actually really move the needle and do it in a way that I think is among the most sophisticated out there in the entire probiotic industry. That's why I'm here.
That's awesome, Bruce. And that's why I want to start. Let's talk about the technology. Let's talk about how this delivery system works and what really sets Probulin apart from other companies out there.
Yeah, so the deliveries aren't new, right? I mean, to take this back on the timeline, right? The very first probiotic was, I think, the 1930s. And it's still out there. It's a dairy drink, Yakult, I think it's called. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
I don't think I ever knew how to pronounce that. Yes.
Yeah, you've seen it. I've seen it written many, many times. I've seen it in a lot of studies. Dairy drinks and traditional fermented food, of course, is where all this started. And then in the 70s, freeze drying came out. And that's when the modern commercial probiotic industry got going. And everybody started focusing on high cell counts. And we quickly learned that was diminishing returns, right? You take 10 times more or 100 times more cells, and there would be almost no difference in the outcomes literature. The patients would all respond the same to the 1% or 1,000th of the dose sometimes. So we learned early on that it wasn't about massive high CFU counts. The gas tank analogy kind of fell apart early on, I'd say. And then it became about living cells versus dead cells. And that's really where a lot of companies, including Jason Mitchell, got started more than 20 years ago, looking at how we can get more living cells to arrive at the colon. And I'll say that it's interesting that dead cells are not worthless. I don't want to paint this picture here that just because the cells die in the stomach or in the intestine, that means that they're worthless. In fact, I think that those cell fragments, even of the dead cells, can still be useful. So I want to make that little sidebar.
Good point.
But I want to point out that the focus of our brand and of most of the research and the literature is on living cells, that if we're going to really shift the ecosystem of your gut, and that's really what we're trying to do here, guys. I mean, the truth is, what probiotics do is they make a bunch of stuff. They make acids and enzymes. They even make vitamins. Mm-hmm. And this can actually shift the ecosystem of your gut by lowering the pH. You can crowd out some of the bad guy strains like yeasts and molds. You can really do a lot of good with probiotics. And we know that the major benefits that we've identified in the science, those come from living cells. Even though dead cells may have their place and they're not worthless, living cells are our focus. And it became this big quest for Jason and a lot of other brands, frankly, to derive a technology that would actually have more living cells survive through the colon. And what makes Probulin unique is, number one, we're not the old enteric coatings, right? I think a lot of people call this technology enteric coating. And I forgive them for that. I used to refer to it as that myself. It's kind of a catch-all term. But actually, the word enteric coating has a very specific technical meaning. It's like the Merck manual and all these other, specific documents. And what you'll read about it is that a lot of it's made out of kind of synthetic polymers. I mean, we're talking like almost like a plastic resin material like methyl acrylic acid. And while that may not be, going to kill you from eating that, it's not something that is ideal for anybody, especially a sunflower shop or who cares about, my mom's stores, we would never sell plastic coated capsules. And I imagine you guys don't either.
Of course not.
And the real deal is, yeah, of course. And the deal is that we wanted to move past that. The whole industry did. And so what we've seen a lot of is compressed gum fibers, where they take various gums like Arabic gum or acacia gum, and they'll compress the fibers, and this will resist acid. Or they'll use like things like alginate, which is a seaweed polymer. That one actually can work too. Some companies use tilapia proteins and kind of a pearl coating. It's a circular thing. There was a whole bunch of innovations in the late 90s about having bacteria survive, and a lot of them, frankly, do work. I'm not going to say ours is the only one that works. Everyone else sucks except. No, that's not true. There are a lot of other technologies that have been studied. And we have found that surviving acid is one part of this process, but we feel our option is superior. We are using a brown seaweed extract. So we're actually not just using an alginate polymer where we're just extracting one molecule. We are, in fact, all the polysaccharides from brown seaweed. It's a way of coating this, but not just making a big shell. This is actually woven into the material. And the way this brown seaweed works is that these polysaccharides are actually creating a microenvironment, much like you would get in food. When you eat sauerkraut or kimchi or yogurt, you are getting a whole matrix, including proteins and sugars and fatty acids. There's a bunch of stuff when you're eating that food. It's not just a pile of bacteria, right? It's not in the lab. So when you're eating the food, you're getting all these polysaccharides, and it turns out going into the gut with all that polysaccharide matrix actually has a big influence on how water enters and encounters these probiotics, how acids or enzymes will encounter and change or modify the probiotics. We're trying to kind of mimic food. Really, that's what this whole narrative of our brand was built upon, is that we're going to use cultured food as our model, and we're going to really study how cultured food works. And it turns out cultured food doesn't just break down all in one shell. It's all woven together, right? Your acids and enzymes from your digestive tract slowly peel away and cleave all the different bonds. And water is slowly encountered by all the probiotics, but it's not all at once. It's not just like powder hit water bath. And so we've studied carefully over the last 15, 20 years is how we can build a better probiotic delivery. And so the first stage of our MacTrek 3D was actually one that came out 20 years ago, was called MacTrek Bypass. And it's still part of our system, but now we've innovated beyond this. But that's where it starts. Acid protection, just like everybody else, only instead of using synthetic polymers, we use brown seaweed, and we do it in a special way that mimics food. So that's the first part of this technology.
Very cool. Very cool. So what from that phase on, you're using brown seaweed to try to bypass the acid side of it. Then what's next?
So that then we get into the electrolytes and the fiber. Right now, the deal with fiber is that the studies are generally on gram levels. If you're really going to do much good with fiber, you usually need 4 grams, 10 grams of fiber. We could never put that in a capsule. It would be a golf ball. Nobody could swallow that, of course. So what we've really done is improved efficiency. We locate those fibers, even at milligram levels, which is not a lot to put in a capsule. We can fit that inside of a capsule. We put that in there, and the idea is that those bacteria are right there with the probiotic and prebiotic fibers. The probiotics and the prebiotics are all sandwiched in there, all wrapped up in all these brown seed polymers, all this different, you've got all these fiber bonds all encased and wrapped in it. And what that does is meaning that we're not just letting the fibers float out into the lumen, right? We want to make them easily located right there so that the bacteria have maximal access. The idea is that improve the efficiency of the prebiotic fibers, because we really understand that to do much good, you need a lot more fiber if you're just going to fill up the lumen and just let them eat all out in the wild floating around. We want to keep them right there and feed them. And the final step beyond stage 2 there with those fuel sources and the fibers is the electrolytes. And this is the part that I think is new, and not many companies are doing this. This
is actually something technology. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this whole issue of tonicity, we're talking really about making the cells survive once they get there. And again, this is a big focus where I think we differ from other brands. We're focused on reanimation, not just getting it to the gut, but actually how they colonize, how they thrive once they're there. And what we do are really, one, we actually include electrolytes. This controls what is called tonicity. Now, most people know if you drink a lot of salt, or if you eat salty foods and then you drink water, you will retain that fluid, right? You'll have edema and fluid and swelling. Salt tends to hold water, does that all over the place. And the thing about salt is that it will attract the water to it. So if you put cells in deionized water, whether they're red blood cells or bacterial cells, almost any type of living cell, if you put it in a distilled deionized water where there's no minerals, what will happen is the water will rush into the cell because it wants to go where the salt is. And that's why you don't put living cells in deionized water, because the water will rush in and pop the cells from the inside. It will burst their cell membrane.
Mm-hmm.
We're concerned about this in your lumen of your gut too. We can't control the tonicity of your entire lumen, right? We're not going to shift the salt concentration of the entire gut. What we can do, though, is put those electrolytes right there in the little seaweed submarine, wrapped up with all the fuel and fiber. And what this does is help prevent water rushing in and popping the cell, or the opposite, where you have the opposite happening, where water will rush out of the cell and dry it all up. They call that crenation, where it shrivels and dries. So this is an element that actually I became fascinated with. This came out of ancient research. I mean, this is based on Ringer's solution, which is something that not a lot of people maybe have heard of, but Ringer's solution actually commonly known in all physiology labs. This dates back to the 1800s. I mean, we've known for a long time that if you're going to study say a heart or a kidney or a frog's, liver, you're going to not just put it in a regular water bath. You're going to put some electrolytes, in this case, what has been known as Ringer's solution for generations now. They'll add that in there, and it prevents water from actually destroying or creating a gradient of pressure. We don't want to create water flowing through the membrane really hard, drying it up or forcing water in to pop the cell membrane. This is something Dr. Mitchell really worked hard on developing with the team at Macwood, our supplier. And I think it's one of the best innovations I've seen in the probiotic industry for maybe the last 10, 15 years I've been in the game. I think it really is part of the process for why our probiotics seem to work so well, is because
I totally agree.
We're not just getting them there, we're having them propagate.
That's right, Bruce. And when I first read that information on that research, I thought it was very interesting, because we know that a lot of people, who deal with constipation just may be dehydrated, or at least mineral imbalance of some sort, whether they're having loose bowels or constipation. And that's why I thought this was the perfect solution to, like you said, when you got the proper electrolyte balance of moving water in and out of that cell properly, it made much sense on why so many people are getting benefits when they're using Probulent, because it's that electrolyte issue that most people are really imbalanced with for that, for at least the gut side of it.
I think you're right. And I wonder if a lot of probiotic manufacturers may start tinkering with the Ringer's solution kind of electrolytic concept of how we're going to help more bacteria survive. That's even right. After they've made it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's fascinating technology. I think you're exactly right. This is what really sets Probulent apart from a lot of other probiotics out there, at least until they start copying and mimicking what you're doing. But I definitely love the electrolyte component to it. So let's talk about prebiotics for a moment. Inulin. Why did you choose inulin out of all the other prebiotics that are out there?
Yeah, frankly, it's one of the best studied, and it has clean sourcing. We get it from chicory root. So it's a really clean, sustainable source. This is not like using a GMO crop like corn or soy or something. Also, it's pretty readily available. It's been studied so intensively. There's a lot of good research, and therefore a lot of companies are growing it and producing it, and therefore keeping the cost down. I mean, there certainly are tiger nuts or other really great sources of prebiotic fibers out there, but a lot of times they're expensive and not as well studied. Now, I'm a big believer, though, of eating prebiotics in your food. I mean, the truth is most Americans just don't eat prebiotics. Eat your beans, eat your nuts, eat your seeds, eat those darn green leafy vegetables that are so hard to incorporate. We all need more of that. I know that's not news. We all know that. But I think most people don't think of it in terms of prebiotic value. And I think that's one of the keys. I mean, having a healthy biome does require eating prebiotic fibers on some level. I think we can't just say take probiotics all day long without appreciating the role that the fuel and the food and the fibers play. It's a big part of their life.
Exactly. And then you got this other term that's getting popular, but people still don't understand the definition of it: postbiotics. What does this mean? Break this down now.
So postbiotics is a controversy, and honestly, Bryan, there's now competing definitions.
Really? Okay.
There are companies now that are making what I'll call heat treated or enzyme killed. They basically take their own patented repeatable process, and once you have those dead cells, some companies are calling those postbiotics, which is kind of frustrating for us because we've been using that term for years over here at Probulent. But I know that the market, people don't appreciate that this industry is still growing and we're still evolving. We're learning new things all the time. And it was only 10 years ago we learned there was lymphoid tissue in the human brain for the first time. We're still learning about our anatomy. We're learning all
Yeah,
kinds of things.
sure are.
So I think the key to understand here is that postbiotics is an evolving term, but the way we use it and the way we think it should be used is all the stuff that isn't so far identified, right? There's a lot of products, a lot of molecules that are made by these bacteria, and many of them have names. We certainly have a name for butyric acid, or we have a name for peroxide, or we have a name. There's a lot of these molecules that have been identified. But there seems to be a whole soup, a milieu of different molecules that especially are related to growth factors. Frankly, I think growth factors are one of the most exciting, but they're not just one molecule, it's a family of related compounds. And it looks like these growth factors actually have a big influence on how the bacteria grow and thrive in their own life cycle. So sometimes it's called a prebiotic effect, but basically these are all the stuff that helps them thrive and grow. It's sort of like when I land on a foreign beach, I'm going to need to build some walls and bridges and schools and homes. That's kind of what these postbiotics are. It's all the tools and all the elements that they're going to need to continue their life cycle and grow and thrive as they live in your gut. So again, our message is not just about getting there. I think the whole industry is so focused, and you've probably seen this in your own career, Bryan. Everyone's been focused on acid protection,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of the story. What we do is going further into the reanimation and the hydration aspect and how these bacteria are going to do once they're already there. And that's where postbiotics also play a big role. So we put this in all of our total care products. We actually have a studied trademarked form called Mactabolite. And we've done a lot of studies against other types of prebiotics and other growth factors. We have never found anything better than Mactabolite. So frankly, we're adding that into all of our new formulations. You'll see it in all of our Total Care Immune, our Total Care for Kids, a chewable. It's really one of my favorite elements that we started putting in our probiotics in the last few years.
That is awesome. Oh, before I forget, I want to ask you about the eldermune, though. I saw that's in your product too as well. So describe, why are you using elderberry and the benefits of it with probiotics?
Yeah, so everybody knows your immune system is hugely located in your gut. I think everybody knows that nowadays. And a lot of people know elderberry and berries and fruits are very good for us. Turns out elderberry is the highest source that has ever been tested of anthnocyanidins. Anthnocyanidins are kind of a fun molecule to say. They're like dark molecules that are found in wine. They kind of have a purple, kind of dark blue kind of tint to them when you see them in the light. If you put them in a petri dish, you can get these from a lot of different plants. They're found in blueberries. They're found in red cabbage. They're found in a ton of different things. But it turns out these molecules have some really interesting effects in our blood, specifically against viruses. So a little bit of understanding about viruses. Viruses have a sticky surface. They're full of sugary little hooks. They call them hemagglutinins. It's kind of like a Velcro. Sticky little surface allows them to bind to many other cells. What these polyphenols and anthanocyanidins are thought to be doing now is that they can kind of be like a duct tape on that Velcro surface and kind of have a blunting effect on viral replication. Remember, viruses stick to something, then they inject little RNA photocopiers and start making that cell into a little, virus factory. We want to prevent them from injecting their little photocopies into a cell. And by sort of duct taping up all their little Velcro, it prevents them from binding and adhering and injecting RNA. That's really the whole interest behind elderberry and a lot of other polyphenols, frankly. Anthanocyanidins are only one, but they're probably one of the strongest and one of the most studied. So right now, as you might imagine, there's a ton of research ongoing about how anthanocyanidins, people who eat more fresh fruits and berries and drink wine may have a lower viral load and they have a better time clearing viruses. So there's a lot of interest in this, as you might imagine. I took a long look at all the elderberry extracts. There's a lot of good ones. Frankly, I'm not going to say ours is the only game in town. I do love eldermune, though. I chose that one because it is organic. That's one. Two, they have a very good high extraction ratio. It's 65-1. So it's like 65 pounds of elderberries to make 1 pound of juice. And they spray dry at low temperature to preserve the actual polyphenols, and they guarantee a minimum percentage. And they spray dry onto a prebiotic fiber. It was perfect. I mean, when I started reading all the organic, it's low temperature dried. Oh, and on a prebiotic, it was like the perfect match to put this into a probiotic formula where we already have some prebiotics in it. It's part of the brand. So I fell in love with eldermune. I think it's among the very best out there. And I really believe that if people take elderberry extracts every day, it can really provide a solid defense and an extra booster for the immune system and provide just kind of an extra layer. We all need extra protection
Sure
nowadays. I
do.
think many of us are concerned about that. So, in addition to drinking well and drinking water and getting sleep and exercising, I think getting polyphenols will be increasingly seen as like a very good thing. And of course, most Americans don't eat polyphenols except in, I think the number one source is coffee and chocolate. So we want to get some other sources into the human diet that are really hotshot polyphenols like anthanocyanidins from dark green berries and
That's right.
elderberry again are the top source. So check out
Well,
our Total Care Immune product. It's going to have the clinically studied amounts along with all the Total Care Mactabolite and along with the MacTrek 3D. It's really the formula that I take every day is our Total Care Immune.
the Total Care Immune. And I know Propylin's got a lot of different SKUs out there. So you would say Total Care Immune is probably one of your favorites, or at least a great place for most people to start with.
It's the one that I use. So let's run through. I mean, if you're walking
Yeah.
into to a sunflower shop and you're not really dealing with any problems. Let's say you're walking in and it's like, well, I don't have functional bowel problems. I'm not having that issue. I'm not having urogenital imbalance. I'm not really here because I'm trying to intervene. I just know that I'm here because I need to manage my microbiome. I want to add. I know I don't eat any lacto fermented foods like real sauerkraut. Major issues. You just want to get a great probiotic and start nourishing your microbiome. I would recommend our daily care. Now, if you're a woman who's experiencing urogenital issues, these are very, very common. I would recommend our women's health, or if even stronger, our Total Care Women's UT formula. And that one's a little bit stronger in some cases. I really love our Total Care line. We have this as a chewable. Our Total Care is really kind of if you're wanting a stronger level, it's more cells. You also have the added metabolite, so all those growth factors. We have our Total Care Original, which has huge diversity. I'd really recommend that one if you're not looking for the elderberry extract, but you want the top dog probiotic in the industry. Total Care is one of the best. Then we have Total Care Immune. It's a little bit different strain mixture, and you're adding that elderberry on. I really love that formula. We do have that same option as a chewable for kids. I think this is recently I've done a lot of work improving potency and stability. I'll tell you, chewables often have issues. They can be inconsistent batch to batch in terms of potency. So we've really done a lot of work to get our potency up to among the very highest I've ever seen among all the children's testing I've done of various products. So we have a lot of options, whether it's for women, kids. I'll mention our colon support. If you're somebody who is struggling to move regularly, or if you're one of those people who has lots of cramping or bloating or abdominal pain, I'd highly recommend our colon support formula. Different strain mix, really geared for helping the peristalsis of the gut. So we have an option for a lot of people, but I think at the end of the day, whatever Probulin product you're going to get, you're going to end up with our MacTrek 3D system. You're going to get strains which we've studied in gastric simulators. You're going to get one of the most sophisticated probiotic preparations that we can possibly make. I really believe Probulin is one of the best options available.
No, I agree, Bruce. I have become a big fan of Probulin now after seeing all the research and all the thought that went into it to get the whole package now. As we started the conversation 20 years ago, research was totally different than where it is today, even though a lot of it is carried over. We understand the gut a lot more now. And so I love the fact that we're putting that type of technology of putting the prebiotics with the pros and understanding how to get it there. And like you said, reanimation of the GI tract. And that's a beautiful thing when you can make everything work synergistically again. And Probulin, I think, has done it.
Yeah,
I think they've done it.
We're definitely growing. We're one of the fastest growing, and I think there's a reason for that. We really appreciate the sunflower shop support. Being in stores like your guys where you have a really sophisticated team, it's where we do well.
Well, I do have one last question before I let you go, because it's a question that we still get every day here at the store. And I'm sure you know what this question is, but why does Probulin not have to be refrigerated? We're still trying to help people understand the research of this now.
Yes, you'll notice we actually package them in individual blister trays. So we've done a lot of work on studying how well these strains will survive at different temperatures. And it turns out a lot of it's about humidity and moisture exposure. So if you can keep these strains super dry, And that's what our metal film on that foil is about. This is basically like glass. You're keeping it completely dry. It's a moisture barrier equal to glass. And so basically when the cells are that dry, even a warm room, even a very hot room, you can even actually, based on the lab tests I've seen, even 100 degrees or 110 degrees, it's not that big of a problem as long as well, you can't keep them there for weeks or months or anything, but a couple of hours at a warm temperature is really not that big of a deal unless it's wet. Now, when you have heat and moisture, the rates of decline are very fast. The cells will die very quickly. So you can either keep them dry or you keep them cold. If you're going to have a wet probiotic, like a liquid, you better keep that cold. If it's a dry probiotic that you can powderize and keep very, very dry, then actually shelf stability is good. So I used to tell people back in the 90s, don't waste your time on shelf stable. Mm-hmm. The technology wasn't good back then. They were just putting bottles in a capsule.
Not at the time, you're right. Yeah,
technology's
made it much better.
That's right. So I'll say that it's all about the testing and how you're controlling moisture. And you'll notice we have a blister tray, which is actually the best control for moisture you can get. So.
That's right. Well, Bruce, you are always a wealth of information. I really appreciate you coming onto the show, and I definitely want to have you back and keep getting this information out to people that technology has made probiotics so much better, but particularly your company has definitely taken it a few steps further. So I'm very impressed with what Probulent's doing, and thanks again for being here, Bruce. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healthy Approach podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you like this podcast and help us spread the word by rating and sharing with your friends and family. If you'd like to learn more about Probulent Probiotics, go to sunflowershop.com. That's shop with 2 P's and an E, or visit us at one of our 2 locations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.